Hello everybody, welcome to the United Stand. How much money can Manchester United spend this coming summer? It's on my mind, it's on your mind. Let's break it down, figure it out, and look at whether it is time to be concerned or whether we can actually give our manager a rebuild that he so desperately needs. Before we get into it though, I think there are three things to consider. First of all, selling is key. You look at Chelsea and the vast amount of money they've spent. A lot of that is pinned or underpinned by their ability to sell. And I think that's something that Man United can do, and we'll go through all the players we can sell to raise the money to bring players in without having to sell pure profit players like Garnacho or Mainu. The second thing I would say as well is that we are an embarrassment as a football club. When you look at our revenue, which is touching £700 million a year, and you look at a Villa or Newcastle that are a third of that, and a Brighton that are probably a quarter of that, and then you look at where we are in the league, we somehow at Manchester United have managed to fail with resources far bigger than everybody else. And I don't think that gets mentioned enough. We have failed massively under the Glazers and potentially under Ineos, but we never should have done because we were always boxing with much bigger gloves. We just missed the target. And the third thing I would say is, and many of you've mentioned this, if you sell a Garnacho or a Mainu and you get that pure profit in for £60 million, a lot of people said you could buy 3 or 4 players with that. My explanation of that would be you can buy a £60 million player with £18 million because simply you put them on a 5-year contract, 60 divided by 5 is 12 million. So you pay 12 million a year for that player. But obviously you've got to give them wages. So even if you give them 150 grand a week, 150 grand a week is £6 million a year. 12 plus 6 is 18. So you've got 18 million. You can buy a £60 million player on a 5-year contract and give him 150 grand a week. But the issue with that is we don't know if we've got 60 million in our pocket that would all go on players, because you could buy 4 players at that rate. It could go on interest payments and it could go on money we already owe to transfers. Because as Kieran Maguire said in an article last week, we owe over £400 million in outstanding transfer fees. So any money we get, we don't know how much of that is actually available. So let's start with PSR because this is what it's all about. How much have Man United got to spend in the summer? The reality is we were apparently very close for the last 3 years. And remember, PSR works like this. The last 3 years of your accounts, you're only allowed to have £105 million worth of losses. Man United 3 years ago lost about 140 million, 150 million pounds in 1 year. But obviously we've lost that year now because it's the next year. So it's a new 3 years at the end of this June. But nobody again can quite figure it out until we get the figures at the end of June to know what our figures are. We actually lost 300 million pounds in our last 3 years as well, which is well over the 105. But there were deductions that were made on Man United's behalf. 40 million from COVID losses, even though I think other clubs didn't claim that much. The interest payment, the 30 million that we paid, that the Glazers took to pay for the Sir Jim Ratcliffe share deal, that didn't get counted as well. So even experts in PSR find it very difficult to predict situations of football clubs because there's so many rules and movements that can be made. But we have to take it on board that we didn't spend in January, and that was because the club said we were very close on PSR. So you can imagine we're probably going to be close again in the summer, but it's very hard to predict how close we would be. We need to sell players. That's the best way to do this. Obviously, there's going to be a big hole if we don't get Europe. That could be 50 million. If you do get Europe and you win the Europa League, the Champions League is worth probably 80 million to us. So Europe's going to have a big factor as well, and we won't know about that till May. But we've got to be active in the market before then. So it takes me back to what's really important, and that is selling players. Before I do that though, I do just want to say, one thing we can say about PSR and FFP is that for a long time, the wage bill has been highlighted as a big issue for Manchester United. I think it's a bit of a red herring because actually our wage bill in the Premier League, I think is the 4th biggest now. And more importantly, we're 3rd from the bottom of the Premier League for our wage to revenue percentage. So Most clubs are 60 to 70% of their revenue spent on wages. Man United is around 50%. It's one of the lowest in the league. So even though we've got the fourth highest wage bill, comparable to our actual revenue, it's only 50%. So I think people who talk about wages at Man United, it's not really the biggest issue. Our biggest cost, because Man United are making, what did I say, around £700 million. So why can't we spend £700 million? Because of all the outgoings. And if wages are making 50% of that, but Arsenal's are 70%, where's the rest of our 50% going if we're not making much of a profit? And of course, within that, you've got repayments on transfers, you've got debt interest, etc., which other clubs probably don't have. So wages reduction isn't that massive. It's selling players that's going to be really important. We need about 100 million, 60 to 100 million pounds in the summer, so we can buy those 4 or 5 players who are worth 60 million pounds and give them 150 grand a week. So 18 million to do one of those. We need 5 of those. So what's that? It's just under 100 million. I think Man United need 5 60 million pound players. To do that, you're going to need 100 million, and then you're going to need to share it over 5 years, as we know. So how do Man United do that, and how much are we going to have to spend? Realistically, we're never going to understand, because we don't know just how close we are with PSR and what manoeuvrability can be made. But I think what's really important is the things we can do. Now remember, amortization is when you buy a player for £100 million and you put them on a 5-year contract. Amortization basically values them over those 5 years. So if I buy a player for £100 million and after 2 years I want to sell them, 100 divided by 5 is 20 million. So for every year that they play for us, 20 million comes off their fee. So if I sell them after 2 years, 40 million's come off. So their book value is 60 million. If I sell them for 70, I've made 10 million profit on the books. If I sell them for 50, I've made a £10 million loss. So we've got a few players at Man United, as we know, Casemiro, Jadon Sancho, Anthony, that we'd love to move them on, but can we actually make any money from it? I think there's 3 players where Man United can instantly make £60 million and not need to sell Garnacho. And I mention Garnacho because a lot of people know in January the club were talking about selling him. They were talking about selling Mainu as well. But let's use Garnacho. If you sell Garnacho, that is £60 million pure profit because he's from the youth. There's no amortization. So that £60 million goes in as pure profit on the books. And that's very attractive. And that is why Ineos are now buying a lot of young players cheaply, because if they can get them to work, yeah, they can play in the first team. But if they then decide to sell them, it's pure profit. And that is why we're doing it. And also Man United like to develop youth. So it goes hand in hand. But I don't want to sell Garnacho and I don't want to sell Mainu. So how do we raise those funds without selling players that we want to build our team around? And there's 3 players we can do this with straight away. Marcus Rashford is, what, £40 million of pure profit in the summer. If he does well at Villa, that's £40 million, Marcus Rashford straight away. Jadon Sancho is going for £25 million to Chelsea. 5-year contract, about £75 million. 4 of those years are gone. So his book value is around £15 million. We're getting £25 million from Chelsea. That's a £10 million profit. So that takes Marcus Rashford and Jadon Sancho £50 million pure profit into the club. 40 for Rashford and 10 for what we're going to get on top of Jadon Sancho's amortization value on the book. That's £50 million. Mason Greenwood, 25 million's already on the books from last year, but we have a 50% rumoured sell-on clause. If he goes to PSG for 55 million, we get half of the extra 30 from 25 to 55, 50% sell-on clause, which would be another 15 million. So 40 for Rashford, we're getting 10 off Sancho, another 15 off Mason Greenwood. You've got your 65 million there. 65 million there, and obviously on top of that, you've got Rashford's wage, which is about 16 million a year, and you've got Sancho's wage, which is about 12 million pounds a year. So you're touching up to 80 million pounds of pure profit there. 80 million pounds, we've nearly hit the 90 we need to buy 5 players, haven't we? So there are ways Man United can do this, but we've got to sell, and we've got to be better at selling. But of course, the red herring in the room is I've just told you a way, quite simply, to raise the money to buy 5 players worth £60 million and give them 150 grand a week each. We're going to need about 90 million to do that, and we can do that how I've just said. The problem is, as we all know, that 90 million we've raised from Rashford, Greenwood sell-on clause and Sancho and all the wages saved, that 90 million's not all going towards players, is it? That 90 million might have to go towards paying off other transfers that we already owe, the 400 million. It might also have to go towards interest payments. It might also have to go for the shortfall because we're not in Europe. So suddenly that 90 million could be swallowed up very, very quickly. And you still need to sell Garnacho. And that's the worrying thing. We can raise money in the summer. We can raise a lot of money in the summer. But how much of that money is already going to be used for debt interest payments and transfer fees we've already owned and covering the revenue drop for not having Europe? And that's the scary thing, because we are a football club that is currently £700 million in debt and also owns £400 million on outstanding transfers, which adds up to over £1 billion of debt. And that's terrifying for Manchester United. So what else can we do without having to sell a Garnacho or a Mainu, which would make us another 60, 70, 80 million pounds? I think there are 3 players that I'd love to get rid of, but they're very, very difficult. You know, you look at somebody like Mason Mount. We paid £55 million for Mason Mount. We put him on a 5-year contract 2 years ago. So what does that work out at? 11 million a year when you divide 55 by 5-year contract. So his book value is 55 million minus the 22 million that we've had him for 2 years. So you would still have to get 33 million pounds for Mason Mount this summer to break even. And no one's going to pay that for someone who's been injured for 2 years. On top of that, if we could get rid of him, it's 12 million in wages. So that would be lovely. That would be a lovely bit of money, but we're not going to sell Mason Mount. Luke Shaw would be pure profit if we sold him, because he's been here that long that his contract originally from Southampton, he's had a new contract since then. So Luke Shaw's pure profit. His wage would bring in 8 million. But who's going to take Luke Shaw? There's another 8 million you could have towards your transfer budget, but who's going to take Luke Shaw? Casemiro's another one. Casemiro, we paid 60 million plus add-ons for him 4 years ago. He's got a year left on his contract, and his book value at the moment for Casemiro would be 60 divided by 4 is 15 million a year. He's had 3 years of his contract. It's a 4-year contract. So 45 million of his value's gone. His book value this summer is 15 million. So we need somebody to give us 15 million for Casemiro for us to break even. But they're also going to have to pay him 350 grand a week. So we're sort of stuck with Casemiro. But if you could get rid of Casemiro, that's 15 million pure profit by not having to pay his wages anymore. There are other issues as well. I mean, look, Anthony is a problem. I know he's scoring goals for Betis, but the value of Anthony on the book is quite concerning. Anthony, we paid £86 million for on a 5-year contract in 2022. So 3 years will be up in the summer. Amortization of that takes it to about 54 million, meaning to break even on Anthony, we'd have to get 32 million for him in the summer. But someone's got to pay him 200 grand as well. I don't think we're going to get 32 million pounds for Anthony in the summer and someone's going to give him 200 grand. So I think we'll be loaning him again next year. Because if we sell him for less than 32, that's a loss. You can't have a loss. Anybody saying, well, just sell him for 20, we can't have a 12 million book loss. We can't do that. That goes down as debts. That goes down as not debt. That goes down as a loss. That comes off your revenue. So Anthony's book value in this summer is going to be 32 million. I don't think anyone's going to give us that. So I think we'll have to loan him again next year and just wait for it to come down another 12 million and then maybe sell him for 20 in 2026 and get him off the books that way. So there are players I'd like to be moving on that I think are going to be problematic. But so much of this, I know we sort of end up where we start. How much can Man United spend in the summer? And this is why it's a little bit like pissing in the dark. You don't know which way the wind's blowing. And we don't know what Man United would do. I see a lot of people going, Rashford, Greenwood, Sancho, this player, there's £100 million. We can just buy 5 players with it. Yeah, you've probably just made £100 million of profit from those sales, and they're all doable. But we don't know what the Glazers and Ineos would do with that money. And it's very unlikely that all of it would go towards players because they've got other things to pay for. And how are they going to pay for it? So the honest answer is, I still think European football and those sales would help us. But we need to sell players. And there's no point selling Garnacho or Mainu for pure profit when you're still going to be paying Casemiro £15 million a year and Mount £12 million a year. I mean, these wages we're paying on Shaw, Mount, Casemiro, they add up very, very quickly to a lot of money, tens of millions of pounds. And that is the way out for Man United. We need to sell. I mean, I don't know what the financial viability is of paying some of these contracts off, but it could be a way of doing it. I think, in conclusion, what we're going to spend in the summer, I think, depends a hell of a lot on how we finish the season. And if we're not in Europe, I can see a sale for Rashford being swallowed up to cover that. If we are in Europe, I think the capability to spend well and compete is good because you're in the Champions League, which brings in a lot of revenue, but you're also in the Champions League, which gives you better players. I still stand by, I think European football will make or break Man United. And if we're not in Europe, I can see a lot of what we sell being swallowed up on fees that we've already got to pay. Get your comments in below. Lots to discuss there. Thanks everyone for watching, and I'll speak to you on the next one.